John stepped off the small transport vehicle and into the crowded space market. The air smelled of hot metal and strange spices. Merchants called out their offers in many languages. Stalls held bright fruits, glowing crystals, and pieces of alien craft. People moved quickly past giant banners that fluttered in the warm breeze. John walked slowly down the main path. He listened to the sounds of haggling and laughter. He felt a bit uneasy in this place. He had never come so far from home, but he had come here for one reason. He had read about this auction on a holopost. He felt sure he could help someone in need. As he passed a line of cages and containers, he saw a raised platform in the center of the market. A large crowd had gathered. Bright lights shone on an open cage. A tall, thin figure stood inside. The creature wore a simple cloth and looked around with her head turning from side to side. She had a long neck and a narrow face. Her skin was pale green. Her ears were long and pointed. She did not look like any being John had ever seen. He stepped closer and heard the auctioneer shouting, "Who will offer 1,000 credits for this fine specimen?" He held up a small sign that showed a price. Many people shouted higher numbers. John watched quietly. The creature in the cage had a blindfold over her eyes. She could not see the bright lights or the crowd. Every sound seemed new to her. She held her arms close to her chest and tapped her feet as if trying to find the floor. She looked afraid. John heard someone say in a soft voice, "They call her the princess. She once lived in a far world." Another voice said, "They say she cannot see. No one wants her." John felt his heart tighten. He thought about his own life. He had a small ship and a modest home. He led a quiet life. Yet he had always believed that every life mattered. He watched the girl move in the cage. He saw her lips tremble. He heard a small whimper. A man nearby placed a higher bid. The auctioneer's sign changed again. The price climbed. Others shouted. Some bids came from rich traders. Others came from soldiers. One tall figure in a dark coat offered 2,000 credits. Another bidder offered 2,500. John held his breath. He did not have much money, but he had saved for a trip like this. He closed his eyes for a moment and thought. He could not let her fall into the hands of people who saw her as worthless. He stepped forward and raised his hand. 3,000 credits, John said in a clear voice. A hush spread through the crowd. People stared at him. The auctioneer paused and looked at the sign. He raised his eyebrows. He tapped the sign. He nodded once. 3,000 accepted? Any higher? The auctioneer waved his arm. No one spoke. The tall man in the dark coat turned away. Other bidders glanced at each other and shook their heads. The auctioneer slammed a small hammer down. "Sold to the brave gentleman," he shouted. John felt a rush of relief. He stepped forward. The auctioneer unlocked the cage and waved John inside. John reached out and placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. The blindfold slipped from her face. She blinked as if seeing light for the first time. John spoke softly. "Hello, I am John. I am here to take you home." The girl froze. Her eyes were white and unseeing. She tried to calm her breathing. She leaned into John's hand. "You're free now," John said. "You don't need to stay here." She did not say anything at first. She raised a hand and touched his face. John felt her long, slender fingers resting on his cheek. She closed her eyes again and let out a small sigh. They left the platform and moved toward a quiet alley behind the stalls. John gave her a small cloth. "You can use this to wipe your face if you like. I have water in my pack." The girl took the cloth, still unsure. John led her to a small transport shuttle waiting at the edge of the market. He showed her the door. She touched the smooth metal and then stepped in slowly. John followed and gestured for her to sit. He closed the door gently and started the engines. The shuttle rose into the air. The noise was loud, but the girl did not flinch. She sat very still. John smiled at her. "Where shall we go?" he asked. "Home or somewhere safe first?" The girl nodded once. She still did not speak. John reached over and held her hand. She relaxed a bit. John stared out the window as the shuttle climbed. He thought of the journey ahead. He did not know much about her world. He only knew that she deserved kindness. He hoped he could give her a safe place. The market lights faded below them. In their place, John saw stars. He squeezed her hand and thought, she is not alone now. He would protect her. John eased into the pilot's seat and pressed the shuttle controls. The engines hummed softly. Oria sat across from him on a padded bench. She held a folded blanket in her lap. The blanket was soft and warm with patterns of bright yellow stars on deep blue fabric. John had chosen it from his storehouse before the auction. He wanted her to feel safe. He tapped the console to play gentle music. A series of soft chimes and flute notes filled the cabin. The tune was one his mother used to sing. It flowed like a calm river. John watched as Oria's shoulders relaxed. He saw the corners of her lips lift in a small smile. She did not know the source of the music, but the melody touched something deep inside her. Oria turned her head toward the sound. She reached out with both hands, moving slowly like a dancer. Her long fingers searched the air as if tracing invisible notes. John saw her breathe more freely, her forehead smooth and calm. He felt relief wash over him. He had feared the journey might frighten her more. After a few minutes, John paused the music. The cabin grew quiet. He took a small pouch from his bag and opened it. Inside were polished stones that glowed faintly in his hand. They were gifts he had picked from a market on his home planet. Each stone held soft light. He held one out too. Oria, this is a memory stone, he said. It glows like a warm light inside you. You can hold it when you feel alone. Oria tilted her head and placed a hand on the stone. Her fingers closed around it. She drew it to her chest and gave a soft nod. She did not speak, but her eyes shone when the light touched her face. John smiled. You can call me John, he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden tablet and a stub of charcoal. I want to know your name. If you touch the wood, I can help you write the sounds. Oria looked at the tablet. She leaned forward and placed her hand on the wood. John guided her fingers, writing gentle lines. He drew a circle, a line, and another circle. He said slowly. Then he traced each line again. He watched as she repeated the lines with her finger. Oria, she said, her voice soft, but clear. John repeated her name. He let it settle in his mind. Oria, he said again with a smile. That is a beautiful name. She tilted her head and whispered it once more. John heard her lips form the word and felt joy stir in his chest. I am happy to know you, Oria, he said. They sat for a while, learning the shapes of each other's worlds. John pointed to the controls and named them. He traced the outline of the shuttle on the tablet and wrote simple words: door, window, seat. He spoke the words and let Oria repeat them. The slow lesson felt like a dance. She laughed. When she said seat, the sound was bright and musical. John laughed too. He reached out to steady himself when a small bump rocked the shuttle. He felt her hand brush his. John held her hand gently. Outside the small window, vast darkness spread. Tiny stars flickered. Like distant lamps. John thought of the millions of worlds beyond. He thought of how small they were in the universe. Still, in this moment, his world was perfect. He pressed another button and poured hot tea into a small cup. The tea smelled of mint and sweet blossoms. John brought the cup to Oria's lips. She touched it with her tongue and gave a soft hum. She sipped the warm liquid and closed her eyes, letting the flavor fill her senses. John nodded in approval. It is chamomile tea. It is calm and warm. Oria nodded and held the cup close. John felt her trust growing. He told her stories of his home. He described green fields, tall mountains, and blue skies. He told her about his parents, who loved music and flowers. He spoke in simple sentences, letting the images flow. Oria reached out and touched his face. She felt the lines of his jaw, the shape of his nose, the warmth of his cheek. John closed his eyes and let her explore. He felt a gentle touch on his lips. He opened his eyes and saw her smile. John placed his hand on her fingers. You are brave, he said. You are strong. She tilted her head. Her breath caught for a moment, and then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. John felt her pulse against his skin. He held her close and whispered, "You are not alone." The shuttle glided smoothly through space. John watched. The lights on the control panel blink. He studied Oria's calm face. He felt purpose in seeing her smile, hearing her laugh, and helping her learn dot as the hours passed. John guided Oria through many small lessons. He taught her to trace letters. He played more music. He showed her the light stones one by one and let her feel their glow. He gave her a small wooden flute that played a single note when blown. Oria placed the flute to her lips and blew softly. A pure tone echoed through the cabin. John clapped softly. He felt pride. He tapped the tablet and wrote the word, music. Oria traced the letters and whispered them. John leaned back and looked at her. He thought of the market and the cold cage. He thought of her fear. He thought of the bright gift she held and the soft melody she played. John smiled. "We will be safe soon," he said. Oria reached for his hand again. She held it firmly. She closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. John squeezed her fingers. Outside, the stars drifted in silence. Inside, John and Oria built a new world of friendship. John did not know all that lay ahead, but he knew one thing. He would stand by Oria, teach her, and share kindness until she knew love and light again. John guided the shuttle down through layers of violet clouds. Each layer glowed with soft light. He watched the control panel and felt the engines slow. A gentle hum filled the cabin. Oria sat next to him, her hand resting on his arm. She felt the motion and held on tight. The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss. John led Oria out onto a landing pad. The air was cool and smelled of fresh rain. John had built his home here, at the edge of a large forest. Tall pines spread in all directions. The ground was covered in soft moss and small flowers. Oria reached out and touched the air. She smiled and pressed her face toward the sky. She felt the cool breeze on her skin. John watched her wonder as she took her first breath of his world. John opened a small gate and led Oria down a stone path. Lights hung from low branches, lighting the way. The path turned and led to a small house built of warm wood. Smoke rose from a chimney. Warm light glowed through the windows. They reached the front door. John pressed a button and it slid open. Inside, the home was simple. A large table stood in the center with chairs around it. A fireplace kept the room warm. The walls held pictures of green fields and tall mountains. John turned to Oria. He held out his hands. "This is our home for now," he said. "You will stay here with me." Oria felt John's warm hands. She nodded. She heard his words and placed her hand on her heart. John showed her to a small room. It held a soft bed and a window seat. The bed had fresh sheets and pillows. The window looked out at the forest. John opened the window slightly. A breeze entered, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Oria touched the sheets. She sank her fingers into them and felt their softness. She knelt beside the bed and pressed her cheek against the mattress as if greeting an old friend. John watched her and felt happy. He pulled out a small card and placed it beside the bed. On it were clothes of soft fabric and simple design. He held up a loose shirt and a pair of pants. "These clothes will fit you well," he said. "They are easy to wear." Oria stood and let John help her change. She slipped into the clothes. The fabric brushed her skin. She tilted her head and felt the sleeves. She took a deep breath and smiled. John held the shirt collar and felt it rest against her shoulders. When she finished, John guided her to a mirror. She reached out to touch it. John placed his hand on hers. "Look," he said, "you look strong and beautiful." Oria placed her hands on the mirror frame. She pressed her forehead to the glass. She felt the warmth of the room behind her. She raised her arms and stretched slowly, like a dancer finding balance. John watched her shape in the reflection. Then John led her back to the main room. He pressed a hidden button on the wall. The fireplace flickered and a hidden door opened beside it. Behind the door, a small library was filled with books. He reached for one and handed it to Oria. "This book has pictures and words. You can touch the pictures and learn about my world." Oria opened the book. She placed her fingers on the raised shapes. She traced the outlines of animals and trees. John spoke each word softly. She repeated them, her voice growing stronger. Soon, light footsteps echoed down the hall. A small figure appeared. It was a young woman about Oria's age. She had warm brown hair and kind eyes. She crossed the room and bowed gently. "I am Lily," she said. "John told me you were coming. I will help you learn and feel at home." Oria smiled and held out her hand. Lily took it and pressed her fingers in greeting. She then hugged Oria gently. Oria felt the soft fabric of Lily's dress and smelled a sweet floral scent. Lily led Oria to a cozy corner. A low table held blocks, soft toys, and more picture books. Lily sat on a cushion and patted the floor. "Come, sit with me," she said. Oria sat and leaned back against the pillows. Lily opened a book of pictures. She guided Oria's hand to each picture. She spoke the words, tree, flower, bird. Oria traced the words with her finger and repeated them. They played a small game where Lily placed a sound stone in Oria's hand. Each stone played a sound: bird song, water flow, wind in the trees. Oria closed her eyes and smiled at each sound. She nodded when she guessed right. John watched from the doorway. He felt a joy in seeing Oria laugh and learn. He pressed his hand to his chest and whispered, "You are safe here." When the lesson ended, Lily brought fresh fruit and warm bread. She placed them on a tray and set it beside Oria. John poured a small jug of sweet juice. Oria reached out and felt the smooth skin of the fruit. She bit into a piece and let the flavor fill her senses. She closed her eyes and hummed. She then reached for butter and spread it on the bread. They ate together at the table. Lily asked questions. Oria answered with simple words. John smiled at each success. The meal ended with soft laughter. As dusk turned the sky pink, John led Oria outside to a clearing. A few small lanterns hung from low branches. A soft breeze moved the tall grasses. John pressed a button and gentle music began again. He placed Oria's hands on his shoulders. He placed his hands on her waist. He guided her through a simple dance step. Oria moved slowly, learning the steps. John watched as she found her balance and smiled. Oria placed her head on John's shoulder. She felt his steady breath. She felt the rhythm of his heart. John sang softly as they danced. After the dance, they stood in the clearing. John held Oria's hands. He looked into her unseeing eyes. He spoke softly. "You are brave. You are loved." Oria leaned forward and kissed his cheek. John felt warmth spread through his chest. He bent down and whispered, "I will keep you safe forever." They stood under the rising moon. The forest was quiet and the world felt right. John and Oria held each other as the stars shone overhead. The next morning, soft sunlight filtered through the curtains. John woke to the sound of birds singing outside. He sat up and saw Oria sleeping peacefully. Her hair spread across the pillow like starlight. He smiled and watched her for a moment. Before gently shaking her shoulder, Oria opened her eyes and blinked as she adjusted to the light. She reached out to touch John's face. He held her hand and guided her out of bed. She stood and stretched, her muscles waking. John led her to the window seat where he had placed a small pot of flowers. He guided her fingers to each blossom. "These are lilac," he said. "They smell sweet and calm." Oria breathed in the scent. Her lips curved into a smile. She nodded and whispered, "Lily." John laughed softly. "Yes, Lily." He helped Oria dress in clothes for the day. He chose a soft green tunic and loose pants. Oria felt the fabric and nodded with approval. She tied a simple belt at her waist. They left the house and walked down a path into the forest. Tall trees stood like guardians. Light danced on the ground as wind moved the leaves. John held Oria's hand so she would not trip. They stopped by a clear stream. Water rushed over smooth stones. John removed his boots and stepped into the water. It felt cool and fresh. He held Oria's hand and helped her step in. She laughed at the tickle of the water on her feet. John pointed to a stone and said, "Stone." He picked it up and let it rest in Oria's hand. Then he said, "Water." She let the water flow over her fingers and repeated, "Water." They played by the stream, moving stones and listening to the flow. John taught Oria to skip stones. He showed her the motion and the sound when a stone hit the water. She tried it and watched with delight as the stone jumped once before sinking. After some time, they returned to dry land. John held a small basket. Inside were fruits and nuts. He offered Oria a piece of sweet berry. She tasted it and hummed in pleasure. He drank from his canteen and offered her a sip. A woodpecker tapped above them. John guided Oria's hand to a tree trunk. She pressed her ear to the bark and heard the tapping. He spoke. "Bird," she repeated, "bird." They walked deeper into the forest and came to a clearing where deer grazed. John knelt and let Oria feel the cool grass. He whispered, "Gentle." She touched the grass and whispered, "Gentle." A deer looked up and saw them. It took a few steps before bounding away. Oria laughed at the graceful motion. John laughed too. They stayed quiet and felt the calm air. At midday, they reached a small lake. The water was still and clear. John guided Oria to a boat tied at the shore. He untied it and helped her into the bow. He sat behind her and pushed the boat with 2 small oars. The boat glided across the lake. John kept it steady. He spoke, "Lake." Oria traced the word on her tablet and whispered, "Lake." He paused and let the boat drift. He poured more tea into cups and offered one to Oria. She held the warm cup and sipped slowly. She closed her eyes and let the warmth spread. John pointed to the shore and spoke, "Home." Oria traced the letters and whispered, "Home." She touched her chest and then his. John squeezed her shoulder. "Home is where you are safe and loved." Oria leaned against him, breathing in his words. John watched the ripples in the water. He thought of the journey so far. He thought of her smile and her growing strength. He steered the boat back to shore. They stepped out and walked along the bank. The sun was high and warm. They found a shady spot beneath a large oak. John spread a blanket and they sat. He opened his pack and brought out picture cards. Each card had raised shapes. He handed one to Oria. It showed a tree. John said, "Tree." She touched the shape and repeated, "Tree." They spent the afternoon reviewing words and pictures. John praised her with gentle words. She glowed with pride at each success. When the sun began to set, John took Oria's hand and led her home. The sky turned orange and pink. The forest grew quiet as animals settled for the night. As they reached the house, John stopped and faced Oria. He wiped a small leaf from her hair. He spoke, "You are learning so much. You are brave and kind." Oria closed her eyes and pressed her hand to his chest. She whispered, "Thank you, John." John smiled and brushed a strand of hair from her face. He said, "Tomorrow we will see new wonders. Tonight, rest." He guided her inside, closing the door behind them. The house glowed softly. Oria felt at home. John looked at her and said, "Sleep well, Oria. You are safe here." Oria nodded and crawled into bed. She held the memory stone close. John sat beside her and whispered, "Good night." Oria drifted to sleep with a smile. John watched her until his eyes grew heavy. He turned off the light and closed the door. He whispered to himself, "You are not alone. I will never let you be alone." In the quiet house, father and daughter of choice rested as the stars watched from above. The next morning brought rain. Soft drops tapped on the roof like gentle drums. John woke to the sound and smiled. He made tea and called for Oria. She came from her room, her hair damp and face bright with curiosity. "Good morning," John said. He handed her a warm cup. "I thought we could learn inside today." Oria nodded and sipped the tea. She sniffed and smiled at the soothing scent. She let the warmth fill her chest. John led her to the main room where Lily waited. Lily held a tablet and wore a bright cloak to keep dry. She bowed to Oria. "Today we will explore sounds and shapes," Lily said. "Are you ready?" Oria nodded and sat at the table. Lily spread out materials, clay, sticks, and picture wheels. John joined them, placing a small bowl of fruit between them. Lily picked up a piece of clay. She guided Oria's hand to shape a ball. "This is clay," Lily said. "It feels soft and smooth. Try it." Oria pressed the clay and let it squish in her fingers. She smiled at the change. John watched her form a rough shape. Lily helped her roll the clay into a long tube. She guided Oria's hand to pinch one end. "That is a branch," Lily said. "A branch of a tree," John said. "Branch." He traced the letters in the air. Oria followed his movement with her finger. She whispered, "Branch." They moved to painting next. John lifted a stick with a soft tip. He pressed it into paint and let Oria touch it. Lily held Oria's hand to guide the stick across paper. Oria felt the brush stroke and heard the scrub of color. She smiled as the paper filled with streaks. John named each color: red, blue, green. Oria repeated the words. After painting, Lily brought a small wheel carved from wood. It had raised letters around the edge. She spun it slowly and let Oria place her hand on it. They stopped at a letter and said the sound. Oria touched the raised shape and repeated. They moved around the wheel until Oria had tried each letter. John clapped softly. "Brave and smart," he said. Oria smiled at his praise. They took a break and ate fruit. John told a story of a brave explorer who sailed through storms. He spoke in simple sentences. Oria listened, hearing the rhythm of the words. When the story ended, Lily stood. "Time to meet the neighbors," she said. Oria looked up. "Neighbors?" Lily nodded. "They will be kind." John led Oria to the front door and they stepped into the cool rain. They walked to a small clearing near the house. A group of neighbors had gathered under a large awning. Men, women, and small children stood in a line. Some bowed. Some smiled. John smiled back. "Thank you for coming," he said. A woman stepped forward. She wore simple clothes and held a basket of flowers. "We heard of the princess," she said. "We want to welcome her." She handed Oria a flower. Oria felt the soft petals and smelled the sweet scent. She brought it to her chest and closed her eyes, one by one. The neighbors offered gifts: a small loaf of fresh bread, a hand-carved wooden bird, a basket of berries. Oria felt each gift, hearing the kind words with each present. A young boy rolled a small sphere across the ground. He watched Oria pick it up. It was smooth and cool. He said, "Ball." Oria touched it and said, "Ball." John watched the exchange and felt pride. He heard a farmer say, "She is welcome here." "She is one of us now." Oria turned to the crowd and spoke. Her voice was soft but clear. "Thank you." The neighbors smiled at her words. John guided Oria back toward the house. Lily walked beside them. "You did well," John said. Oria nodded and held his hand. Inside they warmed beside the fire. Lily played a soft tune on a small harp. Oria closed her eyes and let the music flow. John spoke. "Tomorrow we can explore the market near the woods. You might meet new friends." Oria reached for the memory stone in her pocket. She held it in her hand and felt its glow. She turned to John and said, "I am happy." John squeezed her hand. "I am happy too." He crossed to a window and looked out at the rain. He saw joy in Oria's small smile. Lily stopped playing and poured warm milk into mugs. She handed one to Oria. Oria sipped and felt calm. They sat in quiet comfort. The rain fell softly outside. Inside, they shared kindness. John rose and covered Oria with a soft blanket. He kissed her forehead. "Rest now," he said. Oria yawned and closed her eyes. She felt safe and loved. John watched her until her breathing slowed. He stood and whispered, "Good night, Oria." He turned off the light and left the room. Quiet filled the house. Outside, the rain continued, a soft lullaby for those inside. Morning light fell gently through the windows. John woke to a quiet house. He found Oria at the window seat, holding her memory stone and listening to the breeze. "Good morning," John said softly. He moved to her side and placed his hand on her shoulder. Oria turned and smiled. "Good morning, John." John guided Oria away from the window and to the table. Lily had prepared fruit and warm porridge. The sweet steam rose from the bowl. They ate slowly, enjoying the calm morning. John spoke. "Today we will visit the village and show them your new skills." He smiled at Oria. Oria nodded. She placed her hand on her chest and whispered, "Okay." They dressed and left the house. The path to the village led past fields of golden grass. Birds flew overhead. John held Oria's hand so she would stay steady. They arrived at the village square. People gathered to see them. Some children ran forward, laughing. Adults bowed respectfully. John introduced Oria to each neighbor by name. Oria, this is Thomas the baker. He makes bread for us. Oria reached out and touched Thomas's hand. Thomas placed a small loaf in Oria's hand. She felt its warmth and soft crust. Thank you, Oria said. She held the loaf close. Next, John said, Oria, this is Marcus the blacksmith. He will show you metal work. Marcus held out a small metal shape on a wooden handle. Feel this, he said. Oria felt the cool metal and traced its shape. Marcus explained its purpose. John guided Oria's hand to mimic the motion of holding. A tool. She whispered, strong. Yes, strong, John said. They continued to meet each neighbor. Each gave Oria a small gift, a spoon, a cup, a piece of cloth. Oria felt each object and repeated its name. John watched as Oria's confidence grew. She spoke more words and smiled at each success. Suddenly, a loud voice called, Wait! A tall man stepped forward. He wore dark robes and looked serious. He carried a letter sealed with a red stamp. John frowned. What is this? The man said, This letter is from the council. They heard of an alien in your care. They demand she be examined for safety. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some neighbors looked worried. John felt anger rise. He faced the man. Oria is safe. She is learning and growing. The man held up the letter. The council does not know you. They must follow the law. This order must be obeyed. Oria pressed John's hand. She felt his tension. John cleared his throat. May I read the letter? He broke the seal and read the words. The council required all non-native beings to undergo tests. Oria looked frightened. John knelt and took her hands. She felt his calm breath. John stood and faced the crowd. Oria is a friend. She has hurt no one. His voice was firm but kind. Lily stepped forward. She has brought joy to our village. We stand with her. A gentle wave of support passed through the neighbors. One by one they stepped forward. Thomas the baker said, I will vouch for her heart. Marcus said, She is honest and kind. Others added their voices. She is like one of us. The tall man lowered the letter. He saw the neighbors united. He nodded. I will carry your words to the council, he said. They will listen. John smiled and guided Oria toward the center of the square. He knelt and held her hands. You are strong, he said. You have a home here. Oria felt tears in her eyes. She reached up and kissed John's cheek. The neighbors cheered. Children danced around. Music filled the air as Lily took her harp and played a joyful tune. John stood and offered his hand to Oria. Shall we dance? Oria placed her hand in his. They swayed to the music. The crowd clapped in time. After the dance, neighbors brought food and drink. They shared a feast under the open sky. Oria tasted new flavors and laughed with delight. As evening fell, lanterns lit the square. The village glowed like a field of stars. John and Oria walked to a small stage. John spoke into a simple microphone. Thank you, friends. You have shown Oria kindness. She will call this place home. The crowd cheered again. Oria reached for the microphone. She whispered, Thank you, everyone. Her voice was soft but clear. John kissed her forehead. You did wonderful. They returned to the house. The celebration continued with music and dance. John and Oria stood together, hands linked. Lily whispered, You both brought light to this village and to each other. Oria smiled at Lily and then at John. She felt warmth and love. Later, John and Oria sat by the fire. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. I will protect you always, he said. Oria held the memory stone and rested her head on his shoulder. I will stay with you, she said. John stroked her hair. You are home, Oria, always. They sat in quiet peace as the fire crackled. Outside, the moon watched over them. Inside, they knew they belonged together.